Tereska, okay, so I think we can start our afternoon session, and I have the big pleasure to introduce Stefano D'Ovidio, who is right now postdoc fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Kunstgeschichte, Bibliotheca Hertziana in Rome. He's a big specialist, I would say, of Naples in general. His PhD was written about wooden crosses in Campania, Naples, and he published
Madonnas too,
okay.
Yeah.
The book in 2013, and to a monographic book about this topic, but in the last, let's say, period, he's not only one of the most active authors in Convivium, which is our journal, but he's also like dealing with other questions linked always to Campania and Naples, I would say. San Lorenzo Maggiore. He's now working also in historiography. He wrote an article which will appear very soon about the modernization in terms of early modern period when there were medieval churches. And he's also working, let's say, I would say, in classical historiography in some sense. So he's part of this pool of studies about southern Italy, which is now promoted by the Bibliotheca Hertziana. And today he will do for us a lecture about a very important place for this project, since we are speaking about the Garganos church, which was, is still, in a certain sense, the reason why the Mont-Saint-Michel, which is already exists. So we are like glad to have this lecture. Thank you, Stefano.
Thank you, Ivan. And well, thank you especially for giving me the chance to be here today. And I have a picture really in my mind of a hot day in July outside of the Hertziana as I was smoking my cigarette and you start talking about this project. And it sounded like a fool, really. And actually I'm thinking that from now on we're going to call you even Fooletti. But you know, fools eventually change the world, and probably this project will change, or it is already changing the way we are looking at art history. So thank you very much for this privilege to be here with you, and also to see you at the end of this long walk, see colleagues from the Hertziana that I also should thank for giving me the chance to be here. So when we were talking about the possibility of being here, I had this idea of, you know, just present my sparse thoughts on a place that I know very well, first by experience, and then as an art historian, which is, as you said, the sanctuary of San Michele Archangelo, or San Michele al Gargano, which is outside of Campania, so I am expanding my regional interest, apparently. You all know that San Michele Archangelo al Gargano is located in a sort of a strategic part of southern Italy. That is to say, and I'm sorry for the quality of some of the photographs and the pictures that I was able to gather for this presentation. Here you see part of a network of pilgrim routes, say, or routes in general, especially leading to the Holy Land. And so you see how Monte Sant'Angelo is located in a strategic point on the way to the Holy Land between Rome and Jerusalem, in a way. And the peninsula of Mount Gargano is here. But, you know, location matters in a way, and I believe you can confirm this by experience. And it's not only the geographical location, but also the geographical position of this sanctuary on top of a very high mountain which dominates the plain of Puglia, which we often call in Italian Tavoliere. So I also have here some photographs showing you, the peninsula from an aerial view, and it's really like a high mountain overlooking the plain all the way towards east. So it's a natural bridge, if you want, towards east. And actually, when you read about San Michele Arcangelo, you often read that this is the oldest sanctuary dedicated to Saint Michael, to the Archangel, in Western Europe. And true, I mean, at least to us, we have a clearly sharp division between East and West, but, and it's not me saying, but Jean-Marie Martin already said how, the concept of East and West was completely different, of course, could have been completely different to a medieval pilgrim or in general to medieval people. And I'm showing you this photographs with this famous map, Mappa Mundi, which is in England, as you know. And I don't know if you can locate, that's Italy, you see. Here we have Rome, Campania, and here is the Mont-Saint-Michelis, Mount St. Michelis. So, and you see how, we should probably start rethinking these categories of East and West, and I think this is an important introduction. What I would like to do today was to keep a sort of an experiential approach. So I'm not going to start following the chronological order, but I'd like to follow a topographical order. And I gather here just a few images showing you how, the pilgrimage to Mount Sant'Angelo, especially in the early and late medieval times, was a very, very popular pilgrimage, but it's still going on today. And this, I think, is a peculiarity of this sanctuary in comparison to some other sanctuaries that you might have visited or that we have here, more intended as a tourism than a pilgrimage destination. I have here some graffiti from the 9th century of pilgrims from all over Northern Europe, and also photographs of old and recent pilgrimage to the mountain. And this is basically... There's another story, because originally I wanted to actually share with you at least part of the experience of pilgrimage. So I wanted to actually try, or at least try to walk from the bottom of the mountain all the way up. But if I were a medieval pilgrim, I would say, Lord in His mercy prevented me to do so, and He pushed me down the stairs and I broke my foot, so I have an excuse now for not doing this. But but basically it's a very, very short itinerary that I wanted to cover, as you can see from, I did already my research for the best route, but it was absolutely useless. Anyway, basically we're going to start from the church, San Leonardo a Siponto. Siponto is an old Roman town, later destroyed by earthquake, which was basically the last stop before ascending the mountain, a very difficult path to the mountain. I don't remember if I mentioned it's 1,000 meters high, the mountain, and the sanctuary stands at about 800 meters above the sea level, so it's a very difficult path. Possibly, time permitting, we're going to stop for a few minutes at San Giovanni in Tumba, possibly the baptistry in Monte Sant'Angelo, to finally end and spend most of our time in the sanctuary of Monte Sant'Angelo. Allora, Siponto is there's a church dedicated, as I said, to San Leonard of Noblat. So it's a town near Limoges. San Leonardo de Noblat became very popular in the second half of the 12th century as the saint that prisoners who had been freed, especially after the crusade, were offered a votive offer when they were freed. And actually, what I'm showing you here, it's not the main entrance to the, actually it is the main entrance to the church, but it's not the eastern entrance. It's actually a side entrance, which was privileged as the pilgrimage entrance because it is accessible from the north, where and we know this also from the documents, this church is often referred as built near the Strata Peregrinorum, the road of the pilgrims. Just briefly, I'm showing you this is a very interesting building which still needs to be better studied, I think. I'm showing you the map. It's basically a two-nave church. And the third nave, that for a long time we believe it was incorporated into the monastery of the Knights of the Teutonic Order, which ruled the church since the middle of the 1300s. Now, figures show that this was actually always intended to be a two-nave building. Also interesting for the way, the covered system, there are domes that are incorporated into the Tiburia. So it's a very interesting structure. And you see how the two naves situation is reflected also in the front, in the facade of the building. Inside, there's also a very interesting sundial effect. This is probably dating to the second part of the history of this building. It was the time of the Teutonic Order. Basically, tomorrow, actually, the solstice of summer. The sun flows from the central nave and forming a beautiful flower on the floor at the entrance where the pilgrims entered, in between the two piers that somehow frame the main entrance. Another effect is also created by this rosette that you see here to the front, on the east end, of the church, which actually strikes in during the equinox of autumn and in the fall, and in the spring, strikes the chapel which was originally dedicated to Saint Leonard. So there's this solar effect recalling the ancient times. I also have a photograph here of the only pier in the entire building that is decorated. With a capital that has some images. And the image is the killing of the pork, so symbolizing November. November is the month when St. Leonard is celebrated by the liturgical calendar. But as I anticipated, I'd like to spend most time talking about the portal, the main entrance. And the idea of this lecture is to see, how imagery provided a sort of, a visual counterpart to journey. So for the pilgrims, how this imagery was somehow intended, of course, for an audience, for a viewer who was, of course, on the way to the sanctuary of the Archangel. And the northern portal, it's a beautiful example of late Romanesque art in southern Italy. We have a specialist here, Francesco maybe can later comment on this. I rely on most recent researches, but I think there's still a lot to say about this work. Just the central portal and these two enigmatic reliefs, actually one is an enigmatic relief that you see on top, are consistent to the end of the 12th century. They're dated around 1180, 1185. Allora, as you can see, basically the story, if you want, starts from the inner pier to the left-hand side, where you see, of course, a typical image which recurs very often, as you can imagine, on the route of the pilgrims to the sanctuary, is St. Michael killing the dragon. So it's the victory over evil forces. And then the story continues on the adjoining capital with this story of Balaam, who on the way, he was sent, you know the story of Balaam, I believe. The angel appeared to him several times, blocking his journey, where he had to curse the Israel people, and he was blocked, the ass was blocked by the angel, he could not see the angel. And then the ass doesn't continue her journey until finally the ass talks to Balaam and revealing the appearance of this angel, of this entity that has prevented him to accomplish his evil mission. What is important is that the prophecy comes from this event, from Balaam, and I've written down the famous Latin source. A star will rise from Jacob and will have the scepter of Israel. So this prophecy, as you know, has been intended as a foreseeing of the arrival of Christ, of Jesus. And actually, on the opposite capital, you see the relevant episode of the New Testament. That is to say, the procession of the Magi, the wise men, and you see how the star occupies a visual. So it is a clear correspondence which continues actually. It's a very interesting the way the figures are here presented in a sort of procession. And recently there's a beautiful article, I suggest you to read it, by Jessica Richardson, who wrote particularly on this portal and particularly on the upper reliefs. She also presented this as, the entrance, these figures leading towards the entrance of the church symbolize that entering the church, entering the sacred space, you reach salvation. Whereas when you come out, when you leave of the sacred space, like Balaam is doing, you're going to not to be part of the salvation. Although this figure of Balaam on an ass, which also recurs in other episodes, has often been compared to the pilgrims themselves. So there are still different interpretations. I still think that this should more be seen as, I have other details. There's a beautiful detail of Joseph that is, completely away. There's a Byzantine tradition, also this beautiful Theotokos of the Virgin Mary, but is articulated in a way that seems to explode out of the capital itself. I still think that we should look at these two capitals together, of course, with what's happening on top of them. That is to say, in the figure of Christ as a judge in an almond-shaped halo with the two angels, which is, of course, it's a vision of the Last Judgment. And you know better than me how this is a typical subject, especially on churches. I believe most of the churches you have visited have this same exact subject. But one can also read it in a stricter, more related connection to the angel himself, because it is based also on the idea, as I wrote down the lines from the book of the Revelation, where Jesus is saying, "I, Jesus, sending my angel to testify in the church. I am the root and the ancestry of David, shining and a morning star." So there is some sort, it is not only the prefiguration that we see from the Old Testament and the New Testament, but it's also, how can I say, the iconography of salvation, if you want. And also very interesting, and it's in the lunette, you see all the figures that are carved around Jesus. They're not the usual, blessed or sentenced to hell, but you have, of course, the four figures of the tetramorphs, but you have figures that somehow relate to evil and good. So you have, for example, the figure playing the lyre, that is considered a spiritual music, it's a positive kind, and it's opposite to the flute, which is actually often considered, according to an ancient tradition, like a symbol of evil, because it comes from the inside instead of coming from the outside. And also you have the deer, the she-deer, who's a positive figure, in contrast with the dragon, a symbol of evil that we see very often represented, as I also showed before. I have few beautiful details of the pillars that support these capitals. And then on top of the portal, as you may have noticed, I hope it is clear from this photograph, maybe it's too lightful, but you see the detail down here. You have two figures. Of course, you have Saint Leonard of Noblat, and Saint Leonard is holding the chains. And I told you before that St. Leonard became very popular all of a sudden, toward the middle of the 12th century. This small church in a small town near Limoges, Noblat, near Limoges, all of a sudden became a very popular destination for pilgrims who are accomplishing their vows. And this is something very important to keep in mind. I have here, let's see, you probably recognize this, because before St. Leonard, and even after St. Leonard, there was another figure who was considered as able to perform the miracle of setting free slaves or war prisoners, as is the Santa Foi in Conques. And you see this detail where you see the church, basically, with the chains hanging from the arches. And this is something that we should expect. And also notice how this is part of a Last Judgment as well. So there is also a connection, some sort of iconographical connection, if you want. The author, Jessica Richardson, says that she sees two altars here. But I don't know you've maybe seen these probably better details. I wonder whether on this altar is the iconic image of the Santa Foi or anything else. But anyway, what is interesting is that we have a description of this church. We have description also from the 15th century, but a very clear description of San Leonardo and the interior of San Leonardo by Leandro Alberti, who's a famous traveler and writer of the 16th century, describing the inside of the church in the 16th century. And he says that this most worthy temple is of great importance, not only to the local population, but also to all Italians. There one sees iron works of diverse materials, such as chains, collars, and other similar types of iron work, to keep men imprisoned and chained, from which people were miraculously freed on account of their merits and prayers to the glorious Saint Leonard, who freed many from Christian and in-field prisons, as well as from the galleys. And these iron works were then brought there in memory of the miraculous liberation. And it is a very interesting parallelism between the Church of Noblat, where the actual relics of St. Leonard are kept, the actual body of St. Leonard is there, and this church with no relics of St. Leonard. So it is interesting to see how this sanctuary becomes very, very important, and especially during the time of the Crusades. This is the idea of Jessica Richardson, and actually the foundation of this church has been recently attributed to Bohemond of Antioch. You know, this famous hero of the First Crusade, who was imprisoned for 3 years and who, of course, made a vow to St. Leonard. And actually, when he was set free, he came back, he stopped in Puglia, then he went to Rome, and he finally traveled to Noblat, where he accomplished his vow. Recently, it has been argued that this figure here can represent Bohemondos. I'm not 100% sure. Already Kingsley Porter had thought that this could have been a figure of, you know, a pilgrim offering or actually accomplishing his vow. What is interesting is that this figure, who has no halo and is dressed up as a secular person, is much bigger than the figure of the saint himself. And this detail has been used by Jessica Richardson to symbolize Bohemondo, who is always described as almost a giant. The only problem of this interpretation is that this reliefs date to the end of the 12th century. Bohemondo died since the beginning, 1111. So, but anyway, I think it's intriguing and interesting because it situates this building not only within the context of the pilgrimage to St. Michael, San Michele Archangelo, but within the broader context of the pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the time of the Crusades. Now, after ascending the mountain, we stopped very briefly. I wanted to keep these 3 slides on San Giovanni in Tumba because of where we are. Because, you know, this is a very enigmatic building. Most of the articles that you read on this church or baptistry possibly, you often use the word enigmatic, because this was originally referred as the burial place of a Rotary, of a Lombard, so it's a traditional interpretation. But recently, Paolo Piva has argued that this building was inspired to the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. And it's a very likely possibility. Although I'd like to mention also another possible interpretation by Francesco Aceto, who also using some lost inscriptions which were transcribed in the 16th and 17th centuries, makes a link with another tumba, the tumba that we have a few miles from here. This building was actually a creation of a moment when now the Normans rule Puglia, and there is possibly a connection to the Mount of the Angels of the Normans. But it's an hypothesis. Why this building is important, is famous, it's because of its famous reliefs outside, showing you a very interesting example of it's a series of episodes of the Passion of Christ, and also up until the resurrection. And it's one of the earliest examples that we have in statuary of a deposition from the cross. Now, these two reliefs now are displayed on the portal of the church, but they clearly came from the inside of the church. And according to Paolo Piva, they probably formed a monument which recalled the anastasis in the Holy Sepulchre. What is interesting for our topic is that inside we have a very interesting series of capitals showing three episodes from the stories of Abraham, Abramo, and I show you here some photographs because the condition of these reliefs is very poor now, where you see, of course, the journey to Moira, but you also see Abraham and the angel, and you see the sacrifice of Isaac. And these stories are paralleled to the annunciation to the shepherds. So once again we have the role of the angels, but once again we have a prefiguration of the Passion of Christ, the sacrifice of Isaac, the apparition of the angel, but also the annunciation to the shepherds. So how this imagery is somehow related, not only in the, the process of salvation, the pilgrimage is always a sort of anticipation of the process of salvation, if you want, or an anticipation of what is expecting in the final day, but with the specific role of the angel. So, we finally reached our destination very quickly, on top of Mount Gargano. And I'm showing you here two completely different things. I'd like to start from the actual state of the sanctuary, because if we understand this, we probably better understand the development of the sanctuary throughout the centuries, because we know very little about the origins of the sanctuary. What we know is based mainly on, on the literary source, the so-called Apparizio, or the Liber de Apparizioni Sancti Michaeli, which is a source written in the 8th century, when the sanctuary was already popular, and especially it's a source written by, from the point of view of the Lombards, who by now have adopted this sanctuary as their own national sanctuary. So, of course, it's a source writing several centuries after the possible original foundation. But fortunately, especially in 1950s and 1990s, excavations restoration and excavation works were made at the site, and they uncovered some elements of the original sanctuary from the late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. So everything originated from two caverns, which are now united in almost one single space. A smaller cavern, where you now see the altar of the Eucharist, where, according to the Apparizio, pilgrims worship the footprints of Saint Michael. Saint Michael appeared. The story, I don't know if I maybe just very briefly I recall you the story, is the three apparitions of the angel. First, Garganus, a wealthy man of the area who eventually named the mountain after him, had lost a bowl. And then he saw a bowl at the entrance of a big cavern. And then he also shot an arrow towards this bowl, but the arrow went back and he wasn't able to access the cavern. Then he asked for help and assistance to a bishop. A generic bishop. It is not mentioned bishop of Siponto or bishop or anywhere else. A bishop for advice. And then the bishop ordered the population to fast for 3 days. And then at the end, the Archangel appeared to the bishop and said, I consecrated this site. It was me that consecrated this site. Then the third apparition, then there's a very important story, the war between the bad Neapolitans, Greeks, who attacked the citizens of Benevento and Siponto, the Lombards, and eventually they win against the Greeks. And this is a big story, and this victory is assigned to the Archangel Michael. You understand the politics behind it. It's the Lombards. It's the Lombards who have now conquered, and actually basing on historical evidence, we know of Grimoaldus I, the Duke of Benevento, who was able to defend the sanctuary and took the sanctuary, which also plays a strategic role in terms of defense of this area, of course. And then the third apparition is very important for us, because the third apparition is the Archangel saying to the bishop that this altar doesn't need to be consecrated because it has been consecrated by his presence. This is very important because scholars have debated a lot about, still debating today, about the origins of Gargano. I think this is very interesting, and I'd like to discuss this with you later during the discussion, because of course we have no material relics of an angel. These are incorporeal entities. The peculiarity of the Gargano, which also leads to the Mont-Saint-Michel that we have here, is that the Archangel has now relics, or can offer relics. The relics are the footprints and the altar with the rubeum palliulum, it is written in the source, a sort of a robe, an altar cloth, which is rubeus, that is to say purple. And it's interesting to see how the Archangel is presented also in a parallelism with Christ himself on one side, but there are also some imperial connections. Don't forget, I mean, we should all remember that the cult of the Archangel Michael is first of all an imperial cult in Byzantium and the Near East. So we see in this story, or scholars see in this story, the Byzantine origin of the cult, which is later adopted by the Lombards. So the second cavern is where the altar consecrated by the angel was. And where also there was a vitrium vase made of glass, where the stilla dropping from the top of the cavern was gathered and offered to pilgrims after communion. So basically what happens with the pilgrims is that they first visited the cavern, the smaller cavern, which was, I don't think I've said this, but it's very important, completely separated from the other cavern, which was, you see this kind of rock wall, was completely closing the bigger cavern. So there was a very difficult access to the caverns, which were completely separated. And I have a photograph here. When they were doing restorations in 1950s, under the smaller chapel, they found an altar which has been interpreted as the altar of the footprints. And it's interesting because this altar has been accessible until the 16th century, then later obliterated. The bigger cavern, instead, I've already mentioned, actually maybe this can help you to better understand the complex situation here. So we have a smaller cavern here, a bigger cavern, and the Apparizio says that this bigger cavern was used for rituals, communion, and after communion, drinking the drops, was higher. So it could house up to 500 people. Up to 500 people could be in this cavern. Now, caverns, I'm sorry that we don't have Michele Bacci here, but of course, you all know how this places have been considered sacred. And the traditional interpretation is that the cult of St. Michael has somehow Christianized pre-existing cults. But actually, the most updated scholars insist on this topic. We have no evidence of this, and I don't know what is the opinion of our great specialist of the early antiquity, but Christians tend to stay away from caverns as they could be the site of demonic forces. So it's a sacralization of an environment which was seen in a very mysterious way. or not interpreted very easily. Also, what is important here is that excavations located several Christian tombs which predate the Christianization of the caverns. So the idea of Trotta, who studied a lot at the beginning, is that this site was Christianized by the church, the early Christian church of Siponto. But then we have another opinion here by Harold, I can't remember his name, but anyway, it's a beautiful book on the footprints of the angel. He has a completely different idea, and I agree more with this opinion. It seems like this is a sort of a natural Christianization of a natural environment. Why we can say there is no continuation with the antiquity? Because we have no sign of use of these caverns for Mithra or for other of these pre-Christian gods. So I tend to believe this idea. But he believes also that this was formed by the laymen, by the secular community of the small vicus which was already existing on top of the mountain near the church of St. Peter. And then later is the church of Siponto that is trying to put his hands on this sanctuary. So it's a very complicated matter, but I think it's interesting because, you know, in a place like this, we give for granted, it's the cult of the Archangel, it's famous, but then we still see how many things need to be investigated, especially when you change the point of view. Va bene, this is different, showing you two different sections, but what I think is interesting is that basing on the archaeological evidence and basing on literary sources, it was possible to have, scusate, I want to go back here, to have a reconstruction of how the sanctuary might look like in the early Lombard period. This is important because even if it's different from the early antiquity, it gives us a closer idea, a closer view of what pre-existed. And I go, okay. Because nowadays, I don't know, have you ever been to Mount Gargano? Anyone has ever been? When you now go to Mount Gargano, you should, next pilgrimage. When you now go to Mount Gargano, you descend into the cavern. And you descend into the cavern from the top of the village, which is built at a higher elevation compared. So you descend through a very long staircase, which they call Scala Angioina, although it was, as I shall see later, created already in the Norman period. But in the past, and basically it's following this natural vallone, this natural slope as an axis. An axis which is protected because it's through the village from the south. But in the past, throughout the early antiquity and early medieval times, Lombard times, the access to the two caverns was through a staircase from below. So they would access from, the caverns were above, and they would access from below. And actually, beautiful remains of this staircase built at the time of the Lombards were uncovered during the 90s. And also a 3D reconstruction was presented, although very easy to make because it's just following the structure. And this monumental staircase, we can also, probably that didn't exist in the early antiquity. Probably there was a more simple staircase or just steps partly excavated into the rock, partly built. Then was later monumentalized by the Lombards, if we can use this difficult word, monumentalization. But we have a clear sign of this because we have the inscription of the Lombard Duke, Romualdus I, who, and I also put the dates here, who is considered the first person who monumentalized the access to this sanctuary. The sanctuary became important for the Lombards. First of all, St. Michael was a sort of a link between the Arian and the Orthodox component of the Lombards, as you know. So it was an easier symbol. And also because of its importance through the imperial Byzantine cult. No wonder that it is associated with the idea of ruleship, but especially of military victory. This is very important. And it is along this staircase that hundreds of graffiti were found, dating between the 7th and the 9th century. A certain percentage of this graffiti are not written in a Latin alphabet, but are written with a runic, I think it's the way to pronounce it, that is to say the alphabets of the Lombards, or the barbarians, if you want, before the Latinization. And it is also interesting because by the 7th to 9th century, the Lombards had already adopted, as you have seen, the Latin alphabets. And the use of this language has been compared by specialists or explained by specialists because of the sacrality of the place. So they're using a different alphabet as it corresponds to their religious tradition, and I think this is interesting to notice. And there are several of these graffiti. They also found, and it was possible because they found marks of the robes on the walls of this staircase that pilgrims would use to climb the walls and carve their names on it. So I think. Did you do that anywhere? No. Va bene, meno male. What is interesting is that, as you can tell from this slide, the monumental staircases leading to the two different caverns were accessible through a longa porticus. Allora, the longa porticus, it is mentioned in the Apparizio, 8th century. I forgot to say that the Apparizio also mentioned one ecclesia apodomia, that is to say smaller and smaller, and a basilica grandis, which is exactly what we see in the sanctuary today, the small chapel and the small cavern and the bigger cavern. And it mentions a longa porticus, that is to say an access built on the southern side of the mountain. So this has a very important function, because to access the caverns, especially the small one, they had to come from north, and they were exposed to the north winds. Whereas through this porticus, it was possible to access from the south, be protected from the winds, but also this was possibly used for the ancient rite of the incubatio, and anyway it was used especially as a shelter for pilgrims. And this is extremely important. Now, you see the longa porticus here also in this section, and the longa porticus has been somehow reused now as the lapidarium of the sanctuary. So you go there, it's like a museum. No, we're streaming, I can have that comment on this. Allora, so you understand how in the early late antiquity, early medieval period, we have a sanctuary structure in a very specific way. The two caverns, the longa porticus, the access. It's a sanctuary that we can say for international pilgrimage, because these have been graffiti are evidence of pilgrims that came from Germany, came from France, came from England. There were Saxons also. So it's really an international pilgrimage down to the eastern part of the continent, that is to say to Puglia and the Archangel Michael. Then we have a period of possibly decline. We know that the sanctuary has been sacked by the Saracens. You know that there are pirate raids all along the coast. Like you remember that Bari was also kept as by the Muslims for a while. Then at some point the Byzantine conquer again for a short period, a few decades, the sanctuary. But then a completely new story, a completely new life of this sanctuary happens with the Normans. We start seeing that at the beginning of the 11th century, renovations or new works are produced in the church. There is this interesting, still enigmatic fresco that has been dated towards the middle of the 11th century with a difficult inscription where you clearly see that this is the Custos Ecclesiae, and this was painted very close to the altar of the footprint, so in a very privileged position. There is a name that has been read through the inscriptions that is Leo. This Leo has been interpreted by local tradition as Pope Leo, who visited the sanctuary. Possibly this is a bishop of Siponto. Now, it's interesting because throughout the Lombard period, the sanctuary belongs to the bishop, the diocese, the bishopric of Benevento. There is no diocese of Siponto. So it's also a way for the Benevento and the Lombards to control the sanctuary. At the beginning of the 11th century, we now see a bishopric of Siponto. And I was really impressed when I read the figures by Jean-Marie Martin saying that we see an incredible increase of the numbers of bishopric in Puglia between the 11th and the 12th century, from 8 to 45. So it is clear that this area becomes very strategic. Also, as Jean-Marie Martin wrote, the sanctuary looked almost, the whole area around the sanctuary was desertic, whereas we see an incredible development, urban development in the beginning of the 11th and 12th century. So, of course, there is a sort of a new life, not just for the sanctuary, but for the whole region. Now, so we also have a bishop. There is a Leo, bishop at the beginning of the 11th century of Siponto, could be the symbol that now the sanctuary is part of a new bishopric and it's under the direct control of the Holy See, because the bishopric of Siponto, sorry, I'm just getting confused here. This is San Leonardo. San Leonardo was under the direct, of course, the bishopric of Siponto has strict connection, especially with the time of the Reformation. We know, for example, that Bishop Gerardo was at Monte Cassino at the inauguration of the new church, was related to Desiderio. So there is a direct connection between Siponto and this moment. Also, we see the renovation of the liturgical furnishing of the church. Va bene, I didn't realize that I've been talking for so long, but in the Norman period, we also have the transformation of the access to the church and the sanctuary. So now the steps are built from above, and we now call it Scala Angioina, but you can tell that this Scala Angioina or Angevine staircase stands on a pre-existing Romanesque or Norman, if you prefer. And it's the same for the nave. And this is an important transformation, because this is when now the sanctuary is no longer a cave, but it's an actual monumentalized structure building. You can clearly see how this nave is built on the rock, and you see how they had, this is the church basically, and you see how they basically resolve the access to the two caverns. One is here and the bigger one is there, and they also have space for the choir of the congregation who runs the church. And I think it is even clearer here when you see from these two engravings how the original cavern was much, during the late Middle Ages was much lower. What we see today is the floor, it's lowered of about 70 centimeters. So the access was really into, even more, evident that we're going into the cavern. And here you see the site for the choir. And I'd like to spend the last few minutes on what is, I think, the mark, the imprint, what is in Italian we say the suggello, what marks this renovation in the 11th century, which is the creation of a bronze door. I wanted to spend most of the time talking about the door, but then I have to cut it shorter. But this is an incredible example of actually part of a series of doors which has been sponsored possibly by the same person in the same period, and most of all created in Constantinople for an Italian, if you want, or Latin patronage, and all sponsored by this, or Pantaleone, or Dominus Pantaleone, although we are not 100% sure that this is the same person who also sponsored the bronze doors in Amalfi and the bronze doors in San Paolo fuori le Mura in Rome. Very likely it's the same person. It's very interesting because we tend to call it's a bronze door, but the technique is, of course, much more elaborate because we have 24 panels which are not being cast together, but they're made like little bronze icons, if you want, attached to a wooden panel. And let's see if this is visible. Not very much from here, I'm afraid, because of the bluishy color of this screen. But I try to emphasize, because we tend to call them bronze. This is actually called oricalco. It's a different. There is copper, there is zinc, but there is a percentage of other metals which makes this bronze look like gold. And it's probably better if we look at San Paolo fuori le Mura. Not only they looked like gold, but they were extremely colorful, because most of the figures, as you can see here, the naked parts were worked with a gemina, you know, it's the use of silver. And then there were other colors added, blue, red. It really looked like a reliquary, if you want, one of those reliquary that we see in the same period. And the iconographic program is extremely complex, but also immediate in a way, because we have 24 panels, 23 are engraved and carved with figures, and one is dedicated to the inscription, the dedicatory inscription. And the order of reading is, of course, from top to above and from left to right. Left to right. Then we have 12 panels, basically all the left side, that is dedicated to the episodes of the angel, better I should say apparitions, how angel appeared throughout the, before the incarnation. It is not correct to say in the Old Testament, because the first episode is based on the book of Revelation, is the Archangel Michael who's defeating the evil forces, and the story ends with the Annunciation to Zacharias. It's a very complicated story, because at some point in the 17th century the doors were restored, so the order of the panels is not longer the same. All this section has been messed up. Then we have 6, can you see it? Then we have 6 stories of course, the intervention of the angel after the incarnation. Then, in a very privileged position, we have the inscription, the dedication, which I'm going to read soon. Then we have the 3 apparitions to a bishop, of the angels to the bishop. A bishop, not the bishop of Siponto, because this is strictly following the Liber de Apparizioni. Because in the meantime, in the 11th century, we have a new book, a life of San Lawrence, who is the historic bishop of the Apparizio. So in the 11th century, they create a sort of history to determine how the sanctuary is now part of the Diocese of Siponto. And then we have, we have the last 2 episodes with the angel crowning St. Martin and the Roman martyr Valeriano and Cecilia. And this is a direct connection to Monte Cassino, because in Monte Cassino there was a small church chapel dedicated to St. Martin, and the relics of Cecilia and Valeriano were venerated there. And unfortunately, because of this colors, I don't know if you can tell the colors, but it's a very, very varied quality of the fresco. I'd like to okay, cut, because I'd like to talk a little bit about the inscription, because this is not just a door with images that of course represent what? The intervention of the angel in the history of salvation. But it's also a door, I want to say a talking door, if you want. We have, of course, the inscription here saying that this work was completed in the Regia Urbem of Constantinople. We have the date, we have the name of the patron. We even have instruction on cleaning of the door. And here, the patron is say, Rogo et adiuro. I can read it in English, sorry. This work was completed, blah, blah, blah. I beg and beseech you, the rectors of St. Michael's, that you have these doors cleaned once a year, just as we have now demonstrated, so that they may be always bright and shiny. Even more interesting is the long inscription engraved in the bronze panel of the patron, who is divided in two parts. First, he's talking to you, pilgrims visiting St. Michael. I ask all of you who come here for the sake of prayer, behold first such beautiful craftsmanship. The verb used is inspiciatis, examine, look into the beauty of the craftsmanship. And entering thus, pray prostrated before the Lord for the soul of Pantaleo, who was the originator, author of this work. So, of course, it's a pro remedio anime, but he's inviting the pilgrims to pray for him. And then is the prayer of the pilgrims. Almighty Prince Michael, we, pilgrims, who have come to entreat thy grace, beseech thee to listen to our prayer, maybe better in Latin to understand, because this is a translation in Old English. So to listen to our prayer for the soul of the originator of this work, so that he, together with us, may exult in the everlasting joys, he who caused these sins to adorn the holiness of thy name. So it's the patron, but it's also the pilgrims. Now, and I'm going to conclude with this. Allora, we know that bronze doors were normally kept closed, only open on some feast days. This is what happened in San Paolo Fuori le Mura. But this is not the case of these doors. These doors are the only access to the church, to the cavern. So they must be kept open. And this is one of the problems and the peculiarity of these doors. I'm showing you this old photograph. I'm also showing you the painting of the 18th century, showing you these doors must be open. This is also the problem when you want to look at these doors as you go to Monte Sant'Angelo. So the idea is that there's one more thing that I missed to say, and this is important. Can you read from here? Okay. Above the door, you see ubi saxa panduntur, ibi peccata hominum remittuntur. And then it continues, ec est domus specialis, qua noxialis queque actio diluitur. That is to say, this is the place, so where the rock is open, this is where the sins have been forgiven. And every evil act will be forgiven. Ubi, ubi. This is how each single Okay, thanks. So it is clear the relation between, the function of the door, that is showing the moment when the place, exact place where the angel made this process of salvation possible. Doors, problem of the doors, always made to kept open. But I believe, and I think this is further researches for you that are so interested in researching these topics, there must have been some sort of rituals. We know the symbolism of doors. I'm not going to repeat this, like marking the sacred space, the sacred liminal. Of course, there are ceremonies that we know about it for, of course, the blessing of the doors or the consecration of the church. I'm showing you how some of these ceremonies. There is also some sort of legal aspects concerned with the doors, and the expressions used by Pantaleo really look like official acts, documents, rogo, adiuro, I beg you, and so on. Even the rings as were used, at least in Germany in some contexts, with a legal function. And it is possible that these rings just existed for this reason, legal function, like, for example, when people seeking asylum, refuge in the church, they could touch the ring, and they are safe in the church. You see what I'm saying? So there are some sort of aspects that still need to be considered in terms of the function and the use of these doors, which is not just to manifest the message of salvation of the angel or just even decoration. And I think that I missed this slide. Have you seen this one? Yeah. Okay. And there is another problem, and this is how I'm going to conclude. And it is why and who made this door? Because the opinion is that, yes, Pantaleo just paid, but it's the Bishop of Siponto who wanted to have this door here. And there is many studies thinking it's Gerardo, his connection with the Bishop of Siponto, his connection with Desiderio, and so on. But it sounds weird to me that the bishop who sponsored the creation of bronze door is never mentioned. And I think that the problem here is that San Michele al Gargano, especially 11 to 12, early 13th century, and the clergy of San Michele, they were almost a parallel episcopal see. In the same, there is some sort of dualism or dichotomy, if you want, which is the same process that we also see, for example, in Bari with San Nicola, and the cathedral and the creation of a cathedra by the abbot Elia. And it's the same problem that we see in other contexts in Puglia. And there is a long inscription here in the 14th century also testifying this sort of competition, if you want, between the most important sanctuary and the bishopric of Siponto. And in this inscription, it is the Bishop Alexander who stressed the concept that there was only one seat for the bishop, and that the sanctuary should always consider as part of the bishopric, and whoever dares to react to this will be punished, and so on. So the creation of this door, of course, symbolizes the status of the donor. Of course, Pantaleo, a wealthy merchant from Amalfi, who had commercial relations and lived in Constantinople as well. But probably is also a way for the sanctuary itself to present itself almost as a concurrential competition scene. And no wonder that they're using not the 11th century source stating clearly that there was the Bishop of Siponto San Leonardo, but they're going back to the previous, to the older version, where is a bishop, a generic bishop. So, as it often happens in the creation of artworks, needs also to promote the ambition of, in this case, the clergy or the rectores of the church in contrast with Siponto. Thank you very much for your attention.
thank you much to Stefano. Very nice lecture, and well, I will just react firstly before to the audience, because in the first part you in a certain sense resume what we saw the last 4 months. So the Magi always present the pilgrimage church, the proto-pilgrims who are like close to the scenes of the Theophany. If you're speaking about Last Judgment, probably this one, but before the Last Judgment is a Theophany. So we were like meeting regularly churches where the Magi arriving to the Magi of God with the star. And by the way, thanks to Amalia also, we really get information about those liturgical dramas linked to pilgrimage experience about the Magi arriving to visit Jesus. So it's so interesting to have this image on this portal, which is destined to persons who are supposed to enter, but also to pursue. And then, of course, the double liminal zone, the long corridor full of inscription, so the space where pilgrims can rest, because you don't have space where they can stay, but they have to rest somewhere. If you walk more than 6 kilometers, at a certain point when you arrive to the sacral space, you have to rest. And you have to rest for a bit of time. It's like not 2 minutes. And the space covered by inscriptions seems to me really to be the ideal place of this, like, sort of really prolonged, well, longer resting before or after having like touched the sacral space. And the same for the doors. I don't know what's exactly the situation, but you thought that in Rome they're always closed. Here they were always supposed to be open, but were they always open or not? Should we imagine a double function? Because the doors had also always double function. They are open or closed. And if you imagine the space which was looking like from the photograph as a sort of narthex, atrium, proto-atrium, with the closing doors, suddenly this liminality becomes actual because you close the doors. And you have to open them through the, let's say, also liturgical or ritual event.
Absolutely.
Where walking and then enter inside. So that's for me something really like amazing, because it goes really into the direction of the door as the place where the, let's say, meeting with the sacrality happened the first time. So like, that's my first reaction, but there are certainly many other questions. So.
See, I just wanted to add, because thank you for your observation about San Leonardo. I totally agree. I mean, the idea is that it was a last judgment, but actually it is a theophany, and it's not just, and it's even more coherent, consistent with the rest of the program, which is not just a prefiguration of, you know, the final day, but it's an actual thing that we are experiencing as pilgrim now. And also thank you for the connection with the drama, because of course the Magi, but also Balaam, as I don't know in Puglia, but definitely there is an article of old article of Forsyth talking about this, how this became very popular, also connected to dramas. And one should think that very often dramas took place outside of the churches, and so this is also important to bear in mind. So thank you for your observation.
First of all, thank you for framing such a complex situation very well.
Thank you.
Really complex. I'd like to start from your last point. It's about patronage, because it's really important. You mentioned at a certain point the increase of bishops during the 11th and 12th century. That's very interesting, because it's true that the area was a bit depressed before, but it was not totally destroyed. I mean, it lacked probably big towns, networks, but there were many small rural settlements which they kept under control portions of the territory. But this new phenomenon of building like new towns with new saints, inventing new patrons, is also a consequence of the Norman conquest. And this is the most interesting thing, because it leads the way also to the development of the sanctuary. And with this in mind, I think if we go back to the monuments and try to see how the whole thing works together, we have this settlement with the baptistry, the church, the sanctuary. There are many actors playing together in this representation. And it's interesting because we see different languages. the Tumba is like a French or Crusaders monument in Puglia. Siponto is more the Adriatic way with this polymateric materiality, as you mentioned, Leandro Alberti. So my question will be, with this situation in mind, this multicultural really environment, do you think this is something proper of the Adriatic area? And if we go to the Tyrrhenian Sea, which is your homeland, does it look to you more compact as I see it, or not? Because we had here the Byzantine presence, many documents written in Greek, then the Norman conquest, which was of course also in Campania. So do you think that there's difference between these two sides or not?
That's a very good question, and it's interesting because probably you should answer about Puglia because you're the expert more than me. I think that, of course, Puglia is a strategic position, and it's, if I recall well, it's William of Apulia who writes that the Normans, in the book of the deeds of Robert the Guiscard, the Normans first came to Puglia as pilgrims to the Archangel Michael. And of course, this is written at the end of the century, 11th century, but still, so it's trying to give a sort of a mythological or even eschatological, if you want, a reason why they came all the way down here. In terms of the art, I think everywhere in the Norman world we find this complexity, because Puglia, like Sicily, and I want to say Campania too, have this multi-layered traditions, because of course we have a Greek tradition in the back, and then we have some interesting Norman example. I think about the Duomo di Aversa, for example. Clearly, Puglia seems to play a more strategic role, also for its position projecting towards the east than Campania, and also Puglia is, maybe I am wrong, but it's more frozen in that moment. I mean, we can better investigate the statue area because we still have the monuments. Whereas in Campania, things have changed. What do we have? We have a bit the Duomo di Salerno, we have the Duomo di Aversa, we have nothing in Naples. We have Castel del Lobo, what we see of the castle. So it's probably also, so I don't know how to answer your question. It seems to me that, basing on the material evidence, you are right. There is, but also when you think at Capua, you see the same. For example, the reliefs of San Marcello. It seems really like the Normans came to the south and they were conquered by the south, but they still, to reuse the famous story of the Romans and the Greeks. But at the same time, they also were able to absorb the local culture in a way that then the new product is something new. I don't know, it's a very complicated matter, but yes, the picture that you see, it seems to be more elaborate, more complicated, complex in Puglia than in Campania, but I think it's also because of what we have.
So we can always pick on the survival. So
yeah, that's the thing. This is the easy answer. We don't know because we don't have any, it's a typical story when one doesn't know to. But I still think that figures on what we still have are important, because it is true that we have things that have been lost, but it's also true that if we have many more survivors, it means that what existed in the first place was more, if you see what I'm saying. So it's complicated. Just one thing to mention, it's not me, but it's Jean-Marie Martin who pointed out this importance of the bishopric, and as you stated, because of the Normans. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, curiosities, doubts? Susanna and then Carolina? And Sabina also. Great. So Susanna.
Wow.
My question is much more down to earth, but I would like to know, you were speaking about technique of the doors. And
See.
For me, I don't know, the details are not very much visible.
I know, I'm
those
sorry.
white figures, what is it? white. They are white.
Like this.
Like those
In
right.
wood-body.
Oh, sorry.
The
Like this.
Yes. What is it?
It's silver. Silver. It's a technique called a gemina. I don't know if there is any English word. Maybe, damascene maybe. It's very similar to niellum, basically. The only difference is that the silver is not poured in metal, liquid, but it's, how do you say, battuto. It's like pressed, if you want, with tools within the frame design into the. So we call it bronze doors. When you say bronze doors, we think about, Ghiberti. It's a completely different story. They didn't look like greenish bronze. They look like gold, but they look like gold with colors. Silver, then, I wish maybe I can show you the photographs from here. I hope that in the streaming was visible. I try to stress the colors of the door, and you see the red, the blue, the yellow. So they really look like. I'll show you later from the laptop. But this is, I think, it's important because I still think that it looked like an enormous reliquary. That it's open at some point, and you can actually access the relics of the presence of the angel there.
I didn't understand the other colors. They were painted, or they were.
No, they were painted. They used some minerals in order to give this nuance of blue, yellow, red.
But painted or integrated to the well, painted, really painted.
It's not. They used colors, minerals, gold, like painting. It's not. This is allora. These are made cold bronze, and then the cold bronze is engraved, and then in the engravings there is the gold, the silver, sometimes also copper instead of silver, but to have the same effect, and then colors. See?
So you put into the engraving, let's say.
Oh yeah, that's not visible.
It's colors. It's more visible here. I'm sorry. I also bought photographs from the Alinari archive where you can see the colors. I'm sorry. So it is very colorful. Technically speaking, I need to revise my notes to see how the color was applied, but it is definitely colored. See.
But the principal color.
Excuse me?
The principal color was still gold, or.
Where you see bronze, the black, it's look like gold, because the oricalco has this peculiarity. It's called oricalco in Italian. It looks like gold. It's bronze with the addition of brass. I want to say. I have to double. For sure, we can say they look like gold. Then it's a league of materials. I don't even know whether the bronze is ever mentioned somehow as a material, at least in Western sources, because we tend to use our categories to determine things. If you see what I'm saying. There is a beautiful book by Itai. Do you remember? He also came to this with Itai, The Bronze Object, and it was very inspiring for me to better understand. And it's based on this concept that, of course, we have a concept of bronze, like a green, pure Renaissance, equestrian monument, if you want, whereas things are much more complicated and elaborated in the medieval times.
This is also different from the northern bronze.
Absolutely.
Because,
See.
of course, these were very much luxury objects.
See.
Because of this multi-materiality and this gold appearance. But they were also, if not cheaper, easier to build than to create a massive bronze manufacture. Because they didn't have the technology of other to put one entire door of a single piece
Absolutely.
together.
I'll tell you later. The bronze object in the Middle Age. Ah, thank you. Grazie. I always forget his name. It's a beautiful book. I recommend you to read it.
No, I just wanted to say that I was asking because in Latvia we have the two.
Ah.
In Latvia there are two wooden doors, but the middle one
Mm-hmm.
are missing, the main door, and they were referred as Prieuré.
Mhm.
Nobody knows why. That's why I was asking because the structure of the door it's extremely similar
Mhm.
to the four doorknobs.
Oh, sorry. It's.
But there are four doorknobs on the door, and the Latvia doors are foldable. So I was thinking if really something similar could be like a solution for the main door.
Especially the sounding contacts.
Well, for my previous work on wood, wood was always painted, you know, and it often symbolizes material, precious objects. The earliest wooden crucifixes imitate the great golden and silver crucifixes. I think the material is secondary compared to the effect. It's not that a medieval pilgrim, or even maybe nowadays we say, oh, this is not bronze, this is wood. It's the final effect that you wanted to have, and I think it's golden doors, the doors of paradise. And also for Francesco said something very important. It's these doors are produced like really standardized work. It's a very and it's typical of the workshops of Constantinople. So it's a completely different.
Yeah, they like built a small industry.
Absolutely, it's a small industry, and actually we have an interesting example, and it's a small industry favored by Italian clients who lived in Constantinople. So it's very rare for the Middle Ages to have this incredible. We also have name of some of the artists, and this is actually the largest extant group of Byzantine doors with figures. And also to think about the function, all the silver things that we see here, almost all restored. If you look at Sant'Andrea d'Amalfi, they all disappeared. Pilgrims would touch it. And the face disappeared because they would touch it. So there's another also function for this. Okay.
I'm just interested about the church in Seponto.
Mm-hmm.
About it has two names, and I would like to ask you if you think that the usage of two names can be conscious
Two names.
to remind the two caverns of Mont-Saint-Michel. Because I'm asking because there's probably something similar at Mont-Saint-Michel in the 9th century.
I don't feel like the person who can answer this question because I'm not an expert in architecture. I'm just telling you what I read by the people who have studied that because tradition, people have always said, oh, it's the third nave was incorporated into the monastery later or was never finished. But apparently, it seems like the way the structure has been designed was not intended to have a third nave, a side nave. But actually, I don't know how to answer your question. And I don't think there is any parallelism with the two caverns, which are a completely different situation. That's, I don't think. But still, it's a building that needs to be studied.
I just thought that, I wouldn't say that it was like a parallelism in the sense like it was exactly the same, but just to remind that there are two spaces, but I don't know,
And also it's also the perception that we have of this church, because of course it's not a church that you enter from the east end and then you have the altar. Circulation is different. We tend to adopt the same model for everything, but here, circulation of pilgrims, and there's a circulation of the congregation who ruled the church for about 100 years. I think, I don't know, but I don't know how to answer I'm not an expert of this subject, and I don't want to say something wrong, especially as I'm on streaming. Thank you.
Other questions?
May I just shortly ask, shortly ask about the exterior, like how the space, like before the door looks like?
The exterior of...
It's like a photo, it looks like a little bit like a courtyard.
The atrium.
But you mean the Sant'Angelo? Okay, this one, maybe the one that I...
It's like
But the outside where the bronze doors are, or the actual outside? Ah, okay.
Like if there was like the possibility for the pilgrims to get doors there, like outside of these doors, and
See, excuse me, say it again, please. Say, if someone helps me, because I don't see the...
but it's okay if you can.
No, it's fine. I just can't access to the presentation anymore.
Yeah, because it's like a bit.
But go here, fai presentazione.
Sì, presentazione. No, allora faccio un po' così, se la muoviamo.
But anyway, it's a very, very narrow space, and that's the reason why, grazie, that's the reason why I also put this photograph from the 19th, early to 1900s, because it's very narrow. And also, important, it's used at some point as a funerary place, because all these arches that you see here were later tombs from the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. I think it's part of the rituality of the pilgrims descending down into the cavern through the door, but it's very, very, very narrow. I think it's smaller than this room. See, it's smaller than this room.
I was just thinking about this interaction with the sun. Yeah, always like
The interaction?
with the sun, and sort of how it would be also kind of.
The sun.
Yeah, because it seemed to me like it's more like shadow. Like there was not really like.
And it's almost completely closed. There is no... It's more like a hole. Stupido di nuovo, sorry.
No.
It's more like a hole, it's covered, because it's... and it's basically standing on what was the longa porticus, the shelter for pilgrims.
There's also another question which we discuss a lot, is the question of the opening and closing of the sanctuaries. Because we have like important doors, important portals, and very complicated situations in terms of what you can see and understand. And our question, for example, in Conch, where you have this beautiful, huge tympanon full of inscriptions, details, so on, it seems that the space needs like a time. Look, it's not, let's just cross it in a few seconds. And so one idea is that the image was so powerful that it stopped the crowds. Idea. Second idea that the doors were closed and that you had to spend time in front of the church and to just do something, like you had the images or the inscriptions.
That's
and, very... so the question is, if do you have any, I suppose not, but still, I also think there's a question which was not enough like studied, is the question on when the doors closed, when the doors opened, and who was entering the church and where. And that's maybe crucial, because then you understand.
See, and I don't say this because I want to praise you, but the idea came from your interpretation of the doors of Santa Sabina, because I'm saying, these doors needed to, serve something. Allora, but I've been, I don't know if this has been ever researched. I don't know. I'd like to try if there is any way that we can know how these doors were used in terms of opening, closing, opening times, closing times of the sanctuary, when was it open, when was it not. Or I can also think that as it was in the past, as it is today, also in the past, doors were not only visible as they were closed, but they were also visible as they were open. Because pilgrims must go through the little door, and they cannot miss them. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the point is that when you're entering in the crowd, you don't have the time to see. Yeah?
Those side spaces,
Excuse me?
those two side spaces that you have there were two, because this side space, don't you see the opposite panel of the door?
That's something that I asked myself, because, and I haven't tried, I wasn't able to determine yet if I should have went back there and tried to analyze them with these new questions in mind. Because the first thing that I thought, well, maybe these were two side axes that are lost. But we have tombs there since, and it doesn't seem to be possible, because behind that door is a narrow, the nave continues a little bit larger than the door itself, so there is not even the space. I don't know. That's surprising when you see that a building like this, you think everything has been written and we know everything, still has, different questions, when you have a different point of view. And I think this is crucial. And I believe that your experiential approach could favor these questions to other buildings. This was the idea. But maybe you can do researches on this.
Just from the picture, you can say.
Yeah, no, but
Sì.
we have to leave it.
Sì, shall we go?
Okay.
Thank you for all these questions. Grazie.
And,
Are there any? No, are
no?
there? Oh.
If there are any other questions, great. So I would. Is the question or not? I'm not seeing Amalia. So let's make like 5 minutes of break.
Thank you.
But really 5, and then we'll pursue. Okay? Should we let's take the break?